Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex topics, look at the sources, and give you the key insights you need fast.
And today, August 17th, 2025, we're jumping into a really big one. The current state of American conservatism. There's some intense debates happening right now.
Definitely. It feels like everything circles back to this fundamental question about government power versus individual liberty.
Exactly. And there was a recent executive order that's quite interesting. It's aimed at tackling issues like, well, debanking, for one.
Yes, debanking, where banks might deny services based on someone's political or religious views. That's part of it.
That's a key part. And also protecting against wider religious and political discrimination. It seems like a strategic move to find some common ground.
Common ground between who, specifically?
Between, economic libertarians, the ones really focused on deregulation, and social conservatives, who are more focused on protecting against that kind of discrimination.
Right. So the idea, according to the sources we looked at, is to present this sort of unified front, a front against what they see as an overreaching government and maybe a biased financial system.
Precisely. And this taps into a really deep strain in American conservatism, doesn't it? That impulse to limit government. It's been a theme forever in American political culture.
It really has. So in this deep dive, we want to unpack what American conservatism actually is, where it came from, and why it feels particularly relevant, maybe even a bit volatile right now.
It really pushes you to ask that fundamental question. What if the very foundations America was built on are genuinely under threat? And, what if the fight to preserve them is actually reshaping our future as we speak?
That's a heavy question. To even start answering it, we need to go back to the roots. Let's talk about the foundations, but also the cracks, the fissures within American conservatism.
Okay, so traditionally, analysts break it down into three main strands.
Yeah, that's what our sources point to. You've got the economic or fiscal conservatives, think pro-business, free enterprise.
Then the religious or social conservatives, often pro-church, focused on traditional values.
And third, the national security types, the defense conservatives, pro-military, very patriotic.
And historically, one key thing our sources highlight is that the business elite, that first group, has often been the most powerful within that coalition.
They got there way more often, in policy too.
Yeah, seems so, both inside the movement and in actual government policy. Think about Ronald Reagan back in the late 70s. His big achievement was pulling these three groups together.
The Grand Coalition.
Exactly. It was the result of this fusionist strategy that had been kind of bubbling up since the early 60s.
So you have this powerful coalition built on economic liberty, social tradition, national strength. But you mentioned fissures. Our sources say there were built-in tensions.
Oh, absolutely. Almost contradictions, you could say. Like the pro-business side, focused on growth and markets. Well, that can sometimes disrupt or even dissolve the very religious ideals and social practices the other wing wants to preserve.
The cultural contradictions of capitalism, as it's sometimes called.
Right. And it doesn't stop there. That same pro-business drive, especially with globalization, has also tended towards maybe weakening national boundaries, redefining national security even.
How so?
Well, think about it. After the 70s, you get jet travel, instant communication. Businesses could suddenly operate globally in a way they never could before.
So their identification with just one nation state, their home country, might lessen.
That's the argument. They start thinking globally, not just nationally. And this led to some really interesting friction points.
Like immigration.
Exactly, a big one. You had, say, Protestant conservatives, perhaps worried about cultural changes, but economic conservatives, particularly businesses, often wanted access to cheaper labor.
Which immigration could provide.
Right. And often, the economic argument won out. It's fascinating, isn't it, that the Republican Party, traditionally seen as aligned with Protestants, was actually pretty quick to reach out and bring in newer immigrant groups like Catholics and Jews.
So what happened to that more nationalist strand of conservatism, the one less focused on global business?
Well, according to our sources, much like the purely religious version sometimes felt, it got a bit marginalized.
Yeah.
Betrayed and marginalized is the phrase used.
Where do you find it now, then?
More among, say, small businesses, industrial workers maybe, not so much in the big corporate boardrooms. This shift away from the purely national focus seems tied to those technological changes enabling global business.
Okay, so if there were these internal tensions, how did conservatism manage to not just hold together, but actually surge back so strongly?
Well, the sources point to a key moment, the 1970s. and what they call the Great Debacle of Progressivism.
Meaning progressive policies weren't working?
Essentially, yeah. Across the board,
Okay.
economic, social, moral, even security, there were perceived failures.
Okay, like what?
Economically, you had the great stagflation. Remember that? High unemployment and high inflation. It baffled the standard Keynesian economic thinking of the time.
Which was more focused on
Yeah,
unemployment, right? Not so much inflation.
exactly. So suddenly, there's an opening. And in-walk thinkers like Milton Friedman, with monetarist ideas focused on money supply, independent central banks like the Fed, it was a huge shift. These weren't just small mistakes. It felt like the whole government-led approach was faltering.
And you mentioned security failures, too.
Yeah, think about the Iran hostage crisis under Carter. That was seen by many as just a humiliating debacle. It really shook confidence in progressive foreign policy, especially with the Cold War still raging. The feeling was progressives didn't have the answers.
So, out of these perceived failures, what emerged as the core idea?
According to our sources, it really solidified around anti-governmentism.
Yeah.
That became the sort of unifying core.
Reagan's famous line, "Government is the problem."
That's the one, not the solution. And this wasn't new, right?
Yeah.
It draws on really old American traditions, limited government, self-help, local control, states' rights, individualism, all that.
And you can see that thread continuing, can't you? Even recently.
Absolutely. Think about the government shutdown in 2013, driven by Republicans, or the persistence of the Tea Party movement. Paul Ryan talking about Ayn Rand, the endless debates between Hayek and Keynes among economists.
It's this deep suspicion, almost fear of government itself that some conservatives express, seeing it as the source of problems, something that actually paralyzes us.
Yeah, and our sources raise a provocative point here. When you have conflicts that go right to the foundations of your social system, well, they can really shake things up. Could this strong anti-government stance actually be, in a way, winding down the energy of the whole American experiment? It's a challenging thought.
Okay, we've got the history, the anti-government core. Let's get specific. How does this translate into policies, particularly on the economy?
Well, a classic conservative approach is lower taxes, especially on investment.
Which often gets criticized as tax cuts for the rich.
It does, but the argument behind it is that less tax on capital encourages investment, which grows the economy, and that ultimately benefits everyone, including people at the lower end.
It's a different metaphor, isn't it? Liberals might see the economy as a pie to be divided fairly, while conservatives see capital more like seeds. You need to plant them, invest for future growth.
That's a good way to put it. And the Trump tax cuts are a really clear example of this in action.
Right. What were the key changes there?
Well, the big one for businesses was slashing the corporate tax rate. It went from 35%, which was described as pretty high internationally, worst in class even, down to 21%.
And didn't it change how international profits were taxed?
Yes, huge change.
Right.
It eliminated the worldwide system. So U.S. companies basically weren't taxed by the U.S. on profits they made overseas anymore, only on what they brought back.
And for individuals?
A big increase in the standard deduction, up to $12,000 for individuals, $24,000 for married couples. The idea was to simplify filing for most people. Over 85% of households, the sources say.
And the SALT deduction,
Yeah.
state and local taxes.
That got capped, effectively eliminated for many. This was controversial as it mainly hit higher tax states. The argument was that the federal deduction had been subsidizing those high state taxes.
Okay, so what was the impact, according to the sources?
Well, they point to some strong numbers between late 2016 and early 2020. The S&P 500 stock market index up 56%. Employment grew by nearly 7 million jobs. Unemployment dropped from 4.7% down to 3.5%.
Pretty significant numbers. What about the distribution of those tax cuts? Was it mainly the wealthy?
This is interesting. While the wealthy certainly benefited, one statistic highlighted is that folks earning between $50,000 and $100,000 actually saw their tax liability drop, percentage-wise, by twice as much as those earning over $1 million.
Yeah.
So the impact was maybe more nuanced than often portrayed.
And what about things like energy taxes, carbon taxes?
Generally opposed. Conservatives tend to see those as taxes that hit anyone filling up their car, heating their home, using electricity. They see it as a direct cost on ordinary Americans.
Okay, let's shift gears to another core area. Religious freedom. The school prayer debate seems like a classic example here.
It really is. President Reagan, for instance, actively pushed for a constitutional amendment. He wanted to, as he put it, restore the simple freedom for prayer in public schools.
Which the Supreme Court had ruled against back in 1962.
Correct. And he had support from prominent religious leaders, people like Reverend Adrian Rogers, Rabbi Abraham Shemtov. Their argument was basically about free speech and free exercise of religion Why should students lose those rights at the schoolhouse gate? They felt making distinctions between, say, high school and college campuses for religious expression was illegitimate.
But were there counter-arguments, even from religious perspectives?
Yes, interestingly. Some worried that legislating school prayer, making it official, would actually backfire, that it would lead to a kind of secularization of prayer, a watered-down worship,
How so?
turning something deeply personal and religious into just another part of civil religion, maybe something used just to, quiet the kids down, rather than genuine faith expression.
That's a complex wrinkle. Now let's talk about how conservative thought engages with some current societal debates, particularly around race and inequality. Our sources mention challenges to the idea of structural racism.
Right. Some conservative thinkers view invoking structural racism as, well, the sources use strong language, a bluff and a bludgeon.
What does that mean? A bluff and a bludgeon?
The idea is that it's presented as an explanation, but maybe it doesn't explain very much specifically, and it sort of dares you to disagree if you question it. The implication is you must think something is intrinsically wrong with Black people.
So the critique is that it shuts down discussion about other potential factors, like socially mediated behavioral issues.
That's the argument presented, that it labels dissent as racist and avoids harder conversations. There's also an assertion that race itself isn't just biological but socially constructed, and that the current focus on anti-racism has elements of a moral panic.
A moral panic, meaning an overreaction.
That's the implication in those sources, yeah. An exaggerated societal response. And this ties into another point raised, a critique of what's termed Black fragility.
Okay, what's that about?
It's questioning why, in some contexts, Black individuals or the group seem shielded from criticism or accountability. It flips the script a bit, asking not just what does America owe us, but also what do we owe America? It's about mutual responsibility.
This sounds connected to a broader critique about fairness and opportunity, too. You mentioned the level playing field idea earlier.
Exactly. There's a conservative critique arguing the system isn't a level playing field, but more like a plutocracy ruled by the wealthy.
So not just a left-wing critique, then?
No, this comes from within conservative thought, too. The argument is that the affluent elites have advantages. They're running downhill, while working and middle-class folks are struggling uphill.
Are there specific examples or data points for that?
Yeah, one cited is a 2019 stat showing that a bright kid from a low-income background, even with top math scores in 8th grade, was less likely to finish college than an average-scoring kid from a rich family.
Wow, that's stark.
It is. And it fuels the argument, backed by research from 2 Princeton professors mentioned in the sources, that if policy is dominated by powerful businesses and the wealthy, then America's claim to being a democracy is threatened. It starts looking more like rule by the rich.
And other signs of struggle.
Data points like 40% of Americans struggling to find $400 for an emergency, or the declining odds of moving up the economic ladder from the bottom fifth to the middle or higher, dropping significantly between the 90s and the 2010s.
Okay, this feels like it leads us to the final piece. This idea of reasserting certain truths about human nature and the American system itself.
Right. A fundamental conservative belief, going way back, is that human beings have an unalterable nature. We're driven primarily by self-interest. We're not angels.
And government is necessary precisely because we're not angels.
Exactly. Governments are set up assuming people aren't perfect and can't be made perfect through politics. This is linked to that first wave of liberalism thinkers like Hobbes and Locke. It's different from progressive liberalism, which often does aim for moral improvement through political action.
There's that famous quote, something about the line between good and evil.
Yeah, often attributed to Solzhenitsyn. But the idea resonates deeply. The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. That realism, acknowledged in things like the Federalist Papers, is seen as the bedrock of the American system.
So the challenge today, especially in what some call a postmodern age that values novelty above all, is how do you make the case for these old ideas, these supposedly timeless truths?
That's the core challenge identified, especially when, as the sources suggest, you have a climate where disagreement can lead to being ostracized. The phrase used is that postmoderns sometimes ostracize and destroy other people because of their opinions.
Which makes genuine dialogue, principled pluralism, pretty hard if the other side isn't playing by the same rules of goodwill.
That's the concern. So the argument becomes, we have to reassert a basic truth upon which the American political system is founded, and crucially, do it with a charitable attitude that reflects the truth itself.
Why is that seen as so essential?
Because, the argument goes, this view of human nature flawed but capable of self-government under law actually works. It corresponds to political reality. And it's undergirded what is, arguably, a remarkably successful and just form of government. Preserving that system requires recommitting to its foundational understanding of who we are.
So, wrapping this up, we've traced American conservatism from its different historical strands and the powerful, unifying force of anti-governmentism through specific policy debates on taxes and religion to critiques of societal narratives and this fundamental view of human nature.
It's a really complex picture, isn't it? Full of internal tensions and evolving responses to modern challenges.
Definitely. Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Can America really navigate the crossroads it seems to be at? Can it reclaim its historical identity without first having a serious reckoning with and perhaps a recommitment to those fundamental truths about human nature and individual responsibility that have been its bedrock for so long?
It's a central question, and how it gets answered will undoubtedly shape the future of the American experiment. A lot to think about.